Hey guys, it's the Scholar General Mo Jianbing. I'm going to take a look in this video at the LK Chen Qijia Yaodao. As per usual, this is a sword that was sent to me for the purposes of a video review. I don't own this sword. However, I should say that I will be sending it back, and because of that, I'm not going to do any destructive testing or anything like that, but I will provide quite a bit of historical information as well as tell you, how it feels and what the build quality is like, stuff like that. Let's begin by addressing the term Qijia Yaodao and what that really means. Now, the easy part is the ending part, which is Yaodao. Yaodao just means waist saber. So it will be a saber that you wear at your waist, right? That's pretty straightforward. The more complex part is Qijia. So Qi refers to a general in the Ming Dynasty, Qi Jiguang, and Jia actually means family in Chinese, but basically in this context it means Qi style or Qi family Dao. However, this puts it in a little bit of an interesting place because most of the time whenever people are talking about a Qijia Dao or a Qi style Dao, they're not going to be referring to a sword that looks like this. They'll actually be referring to something that looks like what I last talked about, which is the LK Chen Qijia Yaodao, or the Japanese style Dao. During the Ming Dynasty, General Qi Jiguang was instrumental in defending the southeastern coast from pirates which were affiliated with Japan. These are called the Wokou. After General Qi Jiguang defeated the Wokou, he wrote a few texts describing, how to train troops and tactics and stuff like that. And the first of these was the Jixiao Xinshu, and then later on he wrote the Lianbing Shiji. And in these texts, he commented that the Japanese Dao, particularly the Chang Dao or the Long Dao, was quite useful. And because of some of those things he said, many associate Woyao Dao or Chinese Dao that have katana style blades as being affiliated with Qi Jiguang and the Qi style. But here we can see that LK Chen has a slightly different interpretation of what a Qijia Dao is. And this sword is based off an antique in his personal collection. And part of the reason why he classifies this as a Qijia Dao is due to a quote by General Qi Jiguang in the Lianbing Shiji. And because this has to do with textual interpretation, I'm going to read you the quote and then my own translation. In making a waist saber, the iron must be refined. Use pure steel for the edge, and starting from the spine, use a scraper to flatten the blade to the edge. With smooth polishing, there is no shoulder, so the blade will be sharp. So there's a lot to unpack there. It might seem strange that my translation includes this tool called a scraper, but what that really is it's a hardened steel edge that you use to either cut fullers or flatten a sword. Aside from that, one other crucial thing to note about this line is that it specifically refers to not having a jian or shoulder on the blade. Now, there's a few different ways that you can interpret that. One way you can interpret it would be to say that the edge shouldn't have a secondary bevel. So frequently when you're sharpening knives, you'll have a profile that will be going towards that tip, and then right at the tip you have it takes another angle or another degree, and that creates a bevel that doesn't cut as well. A different interpretation would be that Qi Jiguang is actually saying you don't want to have a shinogi or shobu tsukuri on your yaodao. I talked about this a little bit in my last video, but if we look at this blade, we can see that there's a ridge that goes all the way along the blade, and this is very common on nihonto or Japanese swords during the Ming Dynasty. If that were true, then that would mean that LK Chen's blade, which has no ridge and is more akin to what's called a hiratsukuri, or basically just a triangle, would be more like a shoulderless blade that Qi Jiguang describes. But as with almost all historical interpretations, it's really not that simple. And if we look at this blade here, we can see that it does indeed have a fuller or a groove that goes along the blade. This is something that's not at all mentioned in Qi Jiguang's writing. Additionally, if we look at the images of the Yaodao in the Lianbing Shiji and as well as the Wu Bei Zhi, we can see that these blades have a line going along the blade. Now, it could be possible that the artist here is also trying to show you the spine of the blade as well as the profile. And the problem with a lot of these drawings is that they're not the most precise. You could also maybe say that line along the blade represents the fuller that's on this one, but I don't think it actually matches it that closely. So as you can see, this question of what exactly is a Qijia Dao is very complex, and this term of Qijia Dao was not even used during the Ming Dynasty, so it's not something that Qi Jiguang would have ever heard of. So there's that. It's a more modern term that collectors use. Furthermore, history just isn't that easy. I mean, we have the description from the Qijia Guang himself, as well as an accompanying image that dates to that time period, and it's still not exactly clear what type of sword he's talking about. If we move away from the blade and take a look at the fittings, we can see that LK Chen has accurately reproduced the fang shi, or angular style, that is present on the antique that he owns. However, if you look back at the picture of the Yaodao that Qijia Guang provides, then you'll see that the fittings there are actually quite a bit different. I think that placing the fang shi into the mid 16th century during the Ming Dynasty is a little bit difficult to do, because we don't have a whole lot of artistic depictions of fang shi fittings from the Ming, and most of them are quite late, almost into the Qing Dynasty. So it's kind of an open question as to how far back the fang shi actually go, but they definitely were present at the end of the Ming Dynasty, and they continued to be more popular into the Qing. Now let's talk about the fit and finish of this exact Qijia Yaodao that I've been sent to review. This sword has a blade length that's just over 27 inches, so it's not super long, and that's actually pretty accurate for a lot of swords from China during this time. And in addition to that, it is a little bit on the light side, so this sword is just under 800 grams, or just over 1.5 pounds, and for most dao, that's pretty light. So whenever I picked it up, I was a little bit surprised at how much lack of mass it feels like it has. Like, it makes it pretty quick, and it's it's also because of its length, right? Because the leverage is not as far away from your hand, so you can manipulate it pretty fast. But in addition to that, one other thing I noticed is that this grip. So whenever some people will think that the fang shi, or this angular style grip that's quite square, will be uncomfortable. Now with this one, I have to say it's actually, it has a little bit of rounding to it, and it's not uncomfortable at all. However, I did notice that this grip felt a little bit thin, and it's fine for me, but if you have particularly large hands, you might feel like you have to squeeze a little bit too hard to get your hand actually tightly wrapped around it. In addition, this sword comes with a lanyard. Now, a lot of the time on LK Chen swords, I really like the lanyards, and I think it's important that it's included because too many swords don't have accurate lanyards, to say the least. However, this one, I found that whenever I'm using it, it keeps coming untied, and I'm always having to constantly tie it. So whenever I did some of my test cutting, I actually ended up just taking it off. Overall, the sword is very sturdy, very strong. It's well made, and in the blade, LK Chen, he seems to prioritize the design and function of the blade over everything else, and that really shows in a lot of his swords. And it, as many other blades, this one also has a nice forge welded pattern. I don't know if this one is the one that I got in particular, or all of this model, but the contrast between the steel types on this etching appears to be a little bit more dynamic and dramatic than many of the other ones on LK Chen's swords. And even if that wasn't intentional, that's pretty cool. It is unique. And it's also probably something that if you contacted LK Chen and you asked for that specifically, they might be willing to do that, because sometimes they are, willing to, do a little customization in your piece. This sword also comes with a scabbard, which is quite nice, because many swords in the mid to lower price range will just come with a leather sheath for the sword and not an actual scabbard. And this one's pretty good. I will say that this one is quite loose and it's fairly easy to slide this blade out of here. But the fit of scabbards is something that is very difficult to do consistently across, on mass scale. So it's not really something that you can expect at this price range to get it where it's just like a perfect fit every time. In addition to that, there's a little bit of a wrinkle in the faux leather on the scabbard right towards the chape. But once again, that's something that in this price range is perfectly acceptable in my opinion. I should also say that I'm a big fan of this color, but I do notice that the color on this particular grip is fading a little bit in some parts. But now let's talk a little bit about how the sword actually moves and what, take a couple guesses at what it might have been used for. Because this sword is light and fast, I actually think that it works quite well with a shield. Because when you're using a shield, it's easy to get worn out and tired. And having a sword that is lighter weight can actually help keep you from fatiguing quite as quickly. In addition to that, in the Wu Bei Zhi, whenever it describes the Yaodao, it makes an explicit note that this is something to be used with a shield. So I got my Teng Pai, and then I went out and practiced with that, and also did some test cutting with that. And I can say that I think whenever you're using a shield, particularly due to the size of the shield, the larger shield you're using, then the easier it is to use a smaller sword with that large shield. If you have a very small shield, you want to use, a regular length or a bit longer sword. But a sword of, just over 27 inches or even shorter can very easily be used with a longer shield, and you can actually hide your sword behind the shield more easily because your sword is not too long. So as you can see, this sword cuts very well, and it was a lot of fun to practice using the rattan shield and actually doing some cuts. If you have a rattan shield or you're interested in that type of Daofa, then I highly recommend, checking out the Qijia Yaodao and seeing if it's a good fit for you. Thank you all for watching. Please subscribe and don't forget to stay sharp.